flashes of memory.
I went on my first vacation without any adult supervision and minors under my watch at 19. We went to St. Thomas for a week and stayed at a really nice Marriott on the island. It was me, my best friend, 17, and her little sister and her little sister's best friend, both 16. Everything was going wonderfully. The drinks flowed, we bronzed our ebony skin on the local beaches, and we clubbed bar hopped as we expected to. On our second to last night of parent-free paradise, we decided to take a taxi to the other side of the island to meet up with an American bartender waiter that we had befriended at one of the restaurants on the Marriott property. This is where the night began to go the way of shit. A nice taxi driver who had taken us to most of our destinations and who had become like a grandpa figure to us over the course of our vacation picked us up and told us to call him and he would pick us up when we were done. So once he drove away, we realized we were at the wrong spot. So we, already being pretty buzzed, and to do a recon for this dude walking from club to club, steadily getting more and more wasted, we ended up at this local bar filled with older, sketchy Rasta-type dudes. But by this point, we had been looking for like 3 hours and decided to just enjoy the music and dance the night away. I excused myself from our dance circle to use the bathroom, but after about 10 steps, something told me to look back at my friends. There, standing over my friends, was a huge Rasta sprinkling some type of powder over the unsuspecting teens. I quickly looked down on myself, and there was this dust all over me too. I was officially freaked out, so I run over to them and tell them what's been going on. We're all freaked out now? So we call our grandpa taxi driver, and his wife picks up and tells me that he fell ill unexpectedly and can't come pick us up. We have no way to get back to the hotel, so the younger girls begin to get paranoid and begin ranting about voodoo. I'm tired, drunk, and now officially creeped out but need to keep my cool in front of the girls. So I call the hotel and see if they can send a shuttle. It's like 3 a.m., but they say they can't. Wouldn't you know that while I'm talking on the phone with the Marriott, Rasta man has made his way over and starts in on us, creepy Rasta dude. You girls staying at the Marriott, I can take you there, no problem. I'm actually a taxi driver. My BF. No, we're good, thanks though. Creepy Rasta dude. Why you gotta treat me this way? You goddamn tourist, always fing with our country, you just rape our land for a week and leave us behind. Me. Hey man, calm down. No offense, meant we're good, but really thanks for the offer, creepy Rasta. Dude, who the fuck was talking to you? At this point, we've moved outside and are trying to flag any kind of taxi down. A crowd is gathered and they are all pro-creepy Rasta dude. We are heavily outnumbered both by locals and by men. And now the younger girls are crying. And suddenly, like out of a dream, a taxi driver pulls up and tells us to get in, so we do so without really looking at the car. He's happy and talkative for the first minute of the car ride, and then he completely shuts down, stops talking, and begins to blast some reggae music to the point where we can't hear each other speak in the back. We get within half a mile of the familiar path to the hotel, and he stops the car. For no reason, there isn't a light. He hasn't run out of gas. We certainly haven't asked him to pull over. He just stops the car and turns off the music and sits there like he's trying to debunk Einstein's theory of relativity. And then he turns his left blinker on. His left blinker that would lead us to the shanty side of St. Thomas. The left blinker that would go away from our hotel. My heart drops to my stomach and the worst case of pins and needles kicks in. I turn to the door that I'm sitting next to and try to open the door, but they are locked. I shit you not, I've never been more scared in my entire life, and I've had like 5 movie-style scary moments. I was scared not really for myself, but for my friends and for their families, and especially for my parents who had already lost a child. So I pull it together and try to make my voice as strong as possible and squeak out, "This is not our turn, I think you're confused." And for what felt like an eternity but was probably like 30 seconds, he was quiet, and then turned his blinker off. nodded, and began to drive us to our hotel. When we got out, the security guy, who we had also made friends with, scolded us when we got out about getting into random cars. Turns out there wasn't even a taxi sign on the car. He had just yelled taxi, and we had gotten in due to how distracted we were from the crowd. To this day, I wonder what would happen if I hadn't said anything about the turn. When I was 17, my friend and I were walking down the street near my house at about 1 a.m. We lived in a dense neighborhood dominated by 3-decker houses. We came around a corner to see this huge bull-sized man on his knees over a woman. He was furiously smashing her head into the concrete sidewalk. When I say this guy was bull-sized, I mean he was not fat. His muscles had muscles, and they were bulging. He reminded me of the Hulk, only he was not green. He was red as if he was in heat stroke. We screamed at him right away. He looked up, and I will never forget that face. There was snot pouring out of his nose. Long strands of it hung all the way down to the woman's head. His eyes were bright white, crazed, wide, and far too circular. His face expressed a murderous fury I have never seen before, and hope I never see again. He lifted the woman's head by her hair and with a loud crack, spiked it into the cement like a football, and screamed, "You want some of this, huh?" I had not seen my friend pick up the rock he had, but he threw at the guy's snarling face. He hit him right in the nose. It was a big-ass rock, but it did not even faze the guy. The guy lunged at my friend, who took off running. The guy took off chasing my friend. I knew there was no way a guy that size would be able to catch up to my buddy, who was a track and field athlete. I ran to the woman. Her hair was completely matted, and dark red blood was gushing from a huge deep gash across her forehead. I could not believe she was not unconscious. I tried to tell her I was here to help, and she became combative. She started punching me, screaming to leave her man alone. I was afraid that her screaming would bring that monster back to us. With that thought, I said, "Fuck this," to myself, and I grabbed her wrists and dragged her to the nearest door and started pounding on it. This time it was me screaming, "Open the fuck up." I was scared shitless that this guy would be back before I got to someplace safe. 2 men opened the door and pretty much freaked out when they saw that I was restraining a small woman covered in blood. I think they were about to take me out, but I screamed, "Call the police. Call an ambulance." I told them that we needed to get in before he comes back. I told them, "He will come back." We quickly dragged the woman into the hallway, shut and locked the door. One of the guys called the police, and they showed up in what seemed like seconds. An ambulance arrived soon after. My buddy, seeing the lights of the squad cars, returned to the scene. He outran the guy and got to a store and had the clerk call the police. So I guess they were already on the way before we made the call. The police had a lot of questions, of course. We had no idea who the guy was. We never saw him or the woman before. In the end, the police gave us a card and said that if we see this guy again, call 911 right away. Like I would even hesitate. The next day, the events of the night before were in the paper. I read the article sitting on my porch. It said that the woman was in critical condition. It mentioned my name as well as my buddy. It also said that the man was yet to be identified and was yet to be apprehended. Here is the part that really messed with my head. The place where this happened was 1 block away from my porch. I looked up and could see the spot where he was smashing her head. I remember thinking, that fucker is still out there. And looking down at the paper, he knows my name. 2 weeks later, I turned 18, and I was on a plane to boot camp. This guy scared me that much. I've got one hell of a disturbing story that happened to me a few years ago in the Parisian metro. This happened at station File du Calvaire, which is a pretty nice neighborhood actually. I had a regional train to catch at a bigger station to visit my aunt in another city. But first I needed to reach the central station, Gare de Lyon, using the metro system. So I entered the File du Calvaire station and waited for my train. There were only a couple people on the platforms. I waited and waited, but it still wasn't coming. In Paris, it's not unusual to be able to see the next or previous station through the tunnel from the platform. So people stand on the edge of the platform and impatiently look in the dark of the tunnel to see if they can spot the next train coming, or if they can see it arriving at the nearby station. Here's a Google Images pic of how the station looks. It's very small. So I did just that. I looked at the previous station through the dark tunnel and saw that the train was actually there, but it was not moving and not coming toward my station. I thought it must have some technical issues, and since it was only a few hundred meters away from me, I figured it would eventually just start again and come. After a few minutes of waiting, it got to a point where I could miss my bigger train if I didn't leave this station now. So I had to make a decision quickly. Either know that it's coming and wait some more, or bolt out of the station and take my bicycle to rush to the central and not miss my train. But then, I heard some kind of weak moan coming from the tunnel. I figured, maybe there are some technicians on the tracks, who I can't see because they're in the dark portion of the tunnel between my station and the other one, where the train is standing by. Or maybe there's just some random person on the tracks and that's why the train is stopped, which happens a lot in Paris. But usually they tell you on the speakers. I walked to the end of the platform to have a better look at the dark part of the tunnel. I couldn't see a thing at first, but as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I got chills down my spine. Close enough so I could see there was something, but far enough so it was still too dark, and I couldn't be sure what I was seeing. I saw what roughly resembles a naked male human body laying on the track, but the position was weird, and the angle such that I couldn't see ahead, and wasn't sure of the position it was in. And then it moved. Thanks to the movement, I could make out a pair of hairy, flexed legs that were extremely skinny, I would say atrophied, with very white skin. The legs were facing me as if someone sitting in front of you fell backwards from their chair. It moaned a little more, making my shocked self snap back into reality, realizing that it was an actual person, and one in a very unfortunate position. I couldn't see much, but it was clearly someone crippled. I figured if there had been any impact with a train already, it would be much messier. So this probably hadn't happened yet. But the poor guy seemed completely dizzy, barely conscious. I turned around and started running to the middle of the station where the safety lever was. If you activate it, it cuts off all electric current to the tracks. But as I was about to reach it, I saw 2 security guards rushing the opposite direction to me, obviously to the rescue of the poor guy. It was clear that the current was already off and there was no service. I really wanted to know what happened exactly, but I was about to miss my bigger train. So I rushed out and took my bicycle. Later that day, I Googled the shit out of this and checked all the news websites to see if there were any reports and find out more. I couldn't find anything. My best guess is that some sick fuck had kidnapped and stripped naked a disabled, paralyzed person and put them on the track for fun, in the hope they would be squished by a train. Years ago, when I was in grade school, a kid in our class, Matt, moved away with his mom from our town in the Midwest to the Pacific Northwest. Matt and I had never really got along. I was a fat little shit and a tattletale. He was a cocky little shit and a bully, likely due to his home environment. But thanks to skateboarding and punk music, we bonded through daily AIM conversations over the course of a few years. Eventually, I lost touch with Matt when I entered high school and presumed he'd end up just fine. He was the type who was good at everything. Good at soccer, good on the guitar, very good at arguing, good with girls, and good at being good looking. This is relevant. Just wait. Years pass, and we reconnect when I'm a university sophomore. Matt is now back in our hometown living with his dad, and he's undergoing a personal revolution. He discovered his bisexuality, started using drugs, constantly formed and reformed his philosophy on life, and settled on a new occupation, male prostitution. I was a bit shocked by all of this information, but I resisted the urge to judge him, as did most of our old circle of friends, until they started hanging out with him. Matt would show up almost daily to our mutual friend's house to smoke blunts, drink, and play video games. The more time Matt spent with my friends, the more stories about his weirdness began to trickle out. On one occasion, Matt showed up to our friend's house with a huge shiner and refused to discuss how he got it. This was before my friends knew he was a prostitute. Another time, Matt was high on meth and ran out of gas in the middle of an intersection, while my good friend was in the passenger seat. It must be noted that he was shirtless, still had a massive shiner, and had just finished getting a spray tan at a salon. After acquiring some gas, he proceeded to break the nozzle of the gas can due to unfamiliarity with handling one. My buddy had to take over before the cops showed up. Matt's behavior around women was particularly odd. One night at this same friend's house, Matt showed up for a party, obviously under the influence of some sort of stimulant. He proceeded to tell an Asian girl who happened to be there about his passion for Asian pussy, how it was the best, and how he bet hers was amazing. Naturally, he was essentially shunned for the rest of the night. The next morning, my friend's mom got on her work computer and noticed a website called adamfordham.com or something like that in the browser history, which, unsurprisingly, is a gay dating escort site. Matt apparently had visited the site in the wee hours of the morning to make arrangements with his next client. When he was called out on it, he simply didn't understand what he had done wrong. His social faux pas went completely over his head. I was at university while all of this took place and was only in contact with him via Facebook. During this period of time, his drug use was increasing dramatically because he'd entered into a relationship with the rich drug-using owner of a famous gay nightclub in our city. He often related to me how much money and drugs this guy showered him with, and how he was purposefully manipulating him, the owner, into giving him more money and drugs in exchange for companionship. Matt was using mounds of coke, meth, weed, and probably more that I'm not aware of, and his behavior was becoming stranger and stranger because of it. He'd occasionally make very telling statements about how he was superior to people in some way or another, how he was an excellent manipulator, or some kind of glib compliment that I would brush off. His instability and beneath-the-surface malice became continually clearer to me. A month or two later, he got kicked out of his dad's house because of all the shit he'd been doing, and moved with no money or possessions to the city that my university was located in. One night while I was home for the weekend, I noticed I had about 20 missed calls from him. Turns out he showed up at my dorm building and was at the front desk. I laughed, not really believing him since I'd never told him where I lived, or even which campus I was on. And he told me flatly, "You have a package waiting for you. It's on the board here. I'd been expecting a package. My stomach turned a little bit and I told him that he couldn't just show up at my dorm like that, and to call me ahead of time if he wanted to hang out. When I got back to school, my roommate mentioned to me that he'd had a weird encounter with someone in the basement laundry room. After unloading his clothes into the washer, he turned around to see a man, probably 20-something, wearing a short-sleeved white-collared shirt and a thin black tie, standing between him and the door. My friend, who is a very spiritual person, he claims to see auras and shit like that, saw him shrouded with an aura black as night, and had an accompanying mental flash of him holding a knife or a gun. The person asked him if he could borrow his cell phone, but my roommate had left it in his room. He told him no and hurried out of the basement back up to his room, locking the door behind him. I thought nothing of this story at the time, and 2 days later Matt called me and wanted to hang out. So I met him at a big park down the street. We took a walk while he told me about how he lied to an old woman and convinced her to let him stay in her hotel room, how he'd been stealing food and toiletries from stores, and how he was sure he was going to be more famous than John Mayer in a year. During our walk, we came upon a spot notorious for narcotics distribution, and Matt took the opportunity to scam a pot dealer out of a 5 grams nug by promising he just had to hit up his Chase account before he'd buy an eighth. I smoked the weed with him, feeling a bit uneasy, and once it kicked in, I had to separate myself from him. His beady, empty little eyes were scaring the shit out of me. I told him I was tired and needed to take a nap, and that I'd see him some other time. We parted ways, and then it dawned on me. Matt was wearing a short-sleeved collared shirt and a black tie. My roommate and I went to the front desk that night and told them to call the police if they saw Matt in the building. Matt is currently in jail for contempt of court and telephonic harassment. He was previously in jail for breaking into his ex-landlord's house and hiding in her closet. Thanks for listening to this Stories to the End. Every Wednesday and Sunday, Flashes of Memory publishes a new story.